people think that environmental cost of AI is about carbon, but I'd say the more urgent conversation is actually about resource limits. Energy, water, materials, rare earth minerals. Tech, it doesn't want any limit, but nature has limits. Climate has limits.
If you work in tech and you care about the environment, then you've probably thought to yourself, I know I'm part of the problem, but I'm just not sure how to be part of the solution. At least I felt that way, and my guest today, Nolwenn Godard, felt that way. She spent 13 years at PayPal and even introduced a climate initiative that made it to the semifinals of a competition they were having, only to fizzle out at the end. But she didn't lose hope. She kept chipping away. Nolwenn found herself working for the California government, and she was asked to help draft the first GenAI executive order for Gavin Newsom. And in that order, it was Nolwenn who pushed for including environmental costs in the language. That's huge. Now she leads a consultancy called Carbon 2C, where she helps companies go green, reduce emissions, and save costs. She also co-authored the Sustainable by Design playbook for product managers. This is a wealth of information. PMs, check it out. I'm putting it in the show notes. I wish I had this when I was working in tech, and I'm already learning more about how I can use it in my own business today. Nolwenn is the lead for the Green.io US chapter, and she co-leads the Green Software Foundation San Francisco chapter. Her work sits at the intersection of climate, policy, and tech, and she is a wealth of information. In fact, we didn't even get through everything we wanted to cover, so we're going to have a part 2 conversation where we dive into the case studies. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Nolwenn. I'm Louisa Henry, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job. All right. Nolwenn, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, we're going to get into all of your background and what you're up to, but I would love to know how your relationship with climate first formed. Where was it always there?
It was there from a very, very, very early age because my dad's career was in climate. So I grew up at the dinner table hearing almost every single night about climate and impact. He was a researcher, a scientist in climate for the National Center for Research in France, and also a professor at university. So, I have no merits on my own in terms of discovering the topic. I grew up with it. And, my father was someone who had a lot of influence on me and who I became as an adult. So there's definitely an emotional connection there, I would say. And hearing about those stories when he went to Kyoto and Rio before, so I was growing up and I was hearing about those international conferences, and then his concern and sometimes not really being super optimistic, given that all his recommendations and the climate space recommendations were not really taken into account by the industry and governments, and he's done so much in this area. Sometimes I think he was a bit discouraged, like a lot of scientists in the climate space, seeing that what was needed, there was a big gap between what was needed and then what society in general and economies and governments and industry would put in place to address what was needed.
That sounds like a heavy childhood.
But it gave me a sense of responsibility. It forged my values, I would say, in addition to awareness. And I got passive knowledge as well. I guess I'll talk a bit more about that later in our conversation. But there was a time I retrained myself into climate because I felt like I had to have more, knowledge. But I discovered there's so much I already knew because of this passive knowledge and the constant engaging with my father. Even now that he's retired, he still continues to write articles about it. He has written many books. So, sometimes you reread a chapter, you translate in English something that is written, things like that. So I've been passively engaged for a long time, I would say. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. Okay, but your career didn't start off in climate, right?
No, it didn't. So, maybe I wanted to be more independent at some point. When you're a young adult, you want to have your own trajectory. So maybe I was not ready to step into the, step into the trajectory of my own father. I don't know, whatever that was.
Sure.
I had my
Yeah.
own journey, but I started really doing some volunteering work after I graduated from a business school and went to Lebanon and did some actually nonprofit work, and then discovered geopolitics and tension in the Middle East, and also passively climate issues. Water is a big issue in the Middle East, but after that I went back to France and I took I would say quote regular job in finance, FP&A, and then evolved to IT, which transferred me here in San Francisco, California. And then I was like, wow, this is really where I want to live. I was in tech, discovered tech. I loved it. It was very engaging intellectually for me. And what I really liked was solving problems at scale. And then when I joined PayPal, I was really proud to enable the economy locally, but globally, So it was very satisfying for a while to discover the technology, and there was a sense of mission and purpose that was there.
And you were at PayPal for 13 years.
Yeah,
Is that right?
a long time. But I was very intellectually nourished, and so that's why I stayed so long.
And I know you weren't focused on climate then, but did that ever cross your mind about things you were working on, and or reflecting back? Are you thinking, oh, there were things I could be doing smarter to build for a more sustainable future?
If I knew then what I know now, I would have done so much more in terms of, when I was in charge of platforms, I would have optimized not only from a cost perspective, but from a carbon perspective, energy consumption and all that. But I didn't know at the time. But however, I still had some climate in mind. And, we had some... we had every year, twice a year, we had some innovation kind of competition called Lab Rats. And at the time, it was quite early, maybe 2010, 2011, I don't know. I had the idea of a product called PayGreen, which was basically a carbon calculator that we would have inserted in each payment for purchases and say, hey, do you want to offset the carbon that your purchase is going to cost? And so we went to semi-final with the idea.
Wow.
We were not finalists, but semi-finalists. And I had the opportunity to present, and the European general manager was raving about it. It's like, this is visionary, this is absolutely necessary, this is great. And at the time I had a previous manager of mine who had been reattached to Europe from the US. I'm like, he's so excited about this project. But, it was in the European context, people got it. In the US context, people didn't. And I was a bit disappointed, and it went nowhere versus being funded and people working on it. I guess I was too early for the US conversation.
Yeah, that was early.
So maybe now it would fly more, but back then it didn't really. So I was like, okay, I'm in the right, not the right geography for this kind of conversation. I was a little bit disappointed, but at least I did, I did try something. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then you got appointed by Governor Newsom to modernize state government. And that was a tech job. Did it become a climate job? How did you think about it?
No, definitely. California is special in the sense that as a state, we're exposed to climate impact. We have fires, we have droughts, we had floods, atmospheric rivers, as we called them, a bit earlier. And I remember, having towels around my windows because they were leaking. And I had already experienced the orange skies during COVID, I feel.
Yep.
So California as a state knows better than anyone else that they need to manage climate. So we had some climate initiatives inside the California government. We were building a website for projects available for people to get, help from the state when they upgrade their home energy or install EV for their cars or, this kind of thing. So we were having this kind of project. We had one data science project as well that I really liked, which was predicting droughts before predicting which community, which county is going to run out of drinkable water before it happens based on data.
Oh, wow.
Predictable analytics and AI, not GenAI, but traditional AI, to this kind of work. And then something that was super interesting, I was trying to reflect as well on how we could make disaster related to climate easier for people to manage. And we had the amazing opportunity through some of my contacts I had at UC Berkeley to be in contact with the Ukraine government. And they built this app, this modern technology and mobile app called DIA, where people can do a lot of government services related transactions with just a phone and based in the cloud. And so, for example, if a bomb destroys a house, you can take a picture and say, hey, here's, there was a house before, and everyone has the photo satellites or what it was before, and then you compare and then, hey, can I have some government help, and I was like, wow. Maybe we can partner with them to brainstorm on ideas and the technology to have use cases for California after a climate disaster, or to organize when there is a fire rapidly going from one community to another. So I was very interested in those climate-related focuses in government, and I guess more and more, and to the point I was like, hey, climate is a big threat. It's not going to disappear. I want to train my team so that we all have this awareness, this literacy in climate. And so I had the Climate Fresk come and pitch to us, like it's a workshop, a 3-hour workshop where we get the basics of climate change. I really tried everything I could in the government to start, having this conversation, and around AI as well. I know we might talk about it a bit later, but
we are going to talk about AI. I wanted to ask you about that because you made a distinction there a little bit about, you were using regular AI instead of GenAI. Maybe we'll start with that. Can you give a little primer on what the difference is?
Yeah, so AI as AI discipline has existed for many decades, and it's more algorithm that were trained to either predict a future or to analyze data or to sort things. Is this a cat? Is this a dog? This kind of activity. And then recently in 2022-ish, it started to be more public. There was another form of AI, which is we call generative AI, because it generates outputs. It's not interpreting data to predict a future or to classify, but to create new content, whether it's with language, video, audio support.
You were talking about it in the sense of chat, but I imagine it just gets more and more consumptive as you do more with
and
it, video or image generation.
Extremely energy intensive consumption. And video is, I don't know how many more times more energy intensive than text, but it is. So in terms of sustainability, definitely. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk more about this, but if you can refrain from creating video of flying cats, that's really important. That those technologies that are so energy and water intense are used to good purposes, like saving cancer, for example, not things we don't really need because they have a terrible impact on the planet.
And so when you were working in the California government, you signed or wrote California's executive order on generative AI in like 2 months. 60 days. Can you walk me through that? How does that work? What did it do? And what was the hardest sell? Or what was the pushback like?
So as I was mentioning, when I was in government, GenAI was nascent. So my team, we were the innovation team basically in government. So we were naturally curious, interested in understanding the new technology. On my team, I had the data science team. So we had actually people who had PhD in astrophysics, right? So they understood data and they understood traditional AI. And we were like, oh, what is this new thing? Let's dig a little bit. And what I did was like, hey, let's not make it just the curiosity of the data science team, but also the whole team. So we were like a team of 65 people. And so I created a chat and a Slack channel just for us to exchange information, articles we would read, research, paper we would find, so that we started this discovery maybe a couple of months before the governor officially asked us to write this executive order. So I felt like, oh, that was good. We were inspired to do this work, because otherwise it would have been even more difficult. 60 days is extremely tight deadline. But what we did when we got the request was to meet officially with many parties to have a 360 view. So, of course, the builders. And since we're, California's governor generated ask, the industries, the Google, the Meta, the OpenAI.
Yeah.
The industry, let's say, was definitely happy to pitch to government, of course, and they all wanted the government to have contracts with them. So we could learn from demos on what they were working on and ask security questions and all that. So we were meeting that body. We were meeting also with academia that had worked on AI for many decades, more traditional AI than GenAI, of course. But, we wanted to have the academic point of view, especially on risk and dangers. And also, not only that, but we wanted to engage with nonprofits. Some have done some great work on analyzing the risk of discrimination and bias in services government provides. We were also meeting with those parties because we wanted to understand all the risk and also give a feeling to the community that we were considering them, with all of their knowledge and what they had to tell us, not just talking to one party. So after we did that work, which is a lot of conversation, not taking, and then ramification of our understanding and brainstorming, if we have this, what does it really mean? And what are the externalities? And, so there was a lot of that. And then I worked intensely with my team, and especially two leads that were the most knowledgeable and appropriate for that work to, draft the first draft of the executive order. And then we need to have alignment with two other bodies inside of the government, the technology department. They were in charge more of all the infrastructure. So all the, imagine the security issues related to software, hardware, So they had also to have a say in what we would do to bring GenAI into the government. And then the office of the governor, which is a body that's way more political.
Were there specific use cases you wanted to use GenAI for, or was it just this is something big?
No, so there was two things. So the executive order was more generic. Hey, the government is going to start using it, but we want to do it responsibly and securely. And so it was more like, hey, how are we going to approach that? And then there was inside of the executive order, hey, and we're going to run pilots, and here are the use case we're going to address, and we will identify them, and here's how we're going to roll this out. So there were two steps. Yeah. But definitely we had also to identify those use cases. And what I would say is that, it's in government, not everything is just, operational, like I naively thought, but there's a lot of politics as well. So, for example, one thing that was a little bit difficult to manage was the fact that the governor wanted to, with this executive order, to occur as a leader for GenAI and AI, and especially because California is home to so many of those AI companies, and also because AI is the technology of the future. So claiming, the leadership in AI, at the same time being also more respectful of the Biden administration, also working on their own guidance. We had to wait for them to lead for us to announce what we would do and be aligned.
Oh, interesting.
We could not just say, hey, this is California is doing, woo-hoo. And no, we had to be more, I guess, show deference to the federal government. And then also inside government, a lot of people were very concerned about the risk. It's a very risk-averse environment. And so you had people no, we don't want any of this. And so hey, you cannot tell us to be the leader of something while not using it and not engaging with it. So you need to balance everyone's expectation and comfort level. And so I would say harmonizing the GenAI executive order was a bit of a challenge. And also personally, I remember saying, hey, it's not just about the technology, there are also climate impacts, because I was already very climate aware, and I say, hey, there is some water implication, carbon implication. And, at first I'm like, hey, am I the only one thinking of this here? But luckily it resonated and it stayed in, it stayed in the executive order. So I felt like, okay, if only that, I'm glad I was there and pushed for it.
How was everybody thinking about the climate implications, and how did that impact adoption?
So at first, people were not really thinking about climate that much. I mean, I wouldn't say everyone in government. It's like 250,000 people, and so I don't know everyone, and I didn't talk to everyone. But in my regular conversation, I think me and my team pushing for it more than conversation I would hear left and right. However, California has a clear leadership in climate, and so that was good. We were in a state where people, quote unquote, believe or are aware of climate change and they feel it. And so the government knows it's a real issue. And so I think they were very receptive.
And so what was it that was in the final version?
Mentioned that it had some water and carbon implication. And so that we needed to be responsible and not use the technology without that knowledge. So you have different constraints and you have risks, security related to GenAI that are new risks. And in addition to that, we also had a dimension of climate impact. So how are you responsible and using the technology responsibly is being aware of all the risks and also all the impacts and that it can generate so that, it's more of a responsible usage.
Is the executive order kind of an agreement or some sort of governing document about how we're going to use this technology going forward as our government?
Exactly. It was, it was for the usage of government. It was the first one ever that was, published or released in California. But it was really focusing on the usage of GenAI in the government responsibly for better service of Californians, while also not destroying jobs and making clear that we would be conscious of different risks. It was not a legislation from the Senate saying, hey, the companies can do X, Y, and Z, and individual. It was not that came after separately. But the executive branch saying, hey, we're going to use GenAI in government because we want to be modern. It's time to innovate. We are in a digital era. There were a lot of great hopes with this technology. Of course, there are many risks, but say, hey, for California, one use case is like, hey, we have, I don't know, maybe 17 languages that are fluently spoken in California, from Japanese to Korean to Spanish, English. But there are so many immigrants and not everyone is super fluent in English. So maybe we can better serve our constituents offering support, customer support in any language. So it would look like someone picking up the phone, speaking in Japanese. You have a chatbot translating instantaneously in English, the call center agent respond in English, automatically translated, and with a voice agent given in Japanese or in Korean to the person who has a question about their benefits, right?
Right. So how do you use this new technology to better serve the constituents of California? I'd love to fast forward a little bit in your career and so now you've founded a company called A Carbon to Sea. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what brought that about?
So just to do the transition with government, it's really in government that my interest for climate and AI crystallized and say, hey, those are the two biggest threats to humanity as we know it. And also fantastic potential for AI and even AI to solve climate, but there are many, many risks and it's not a done deal that's going to be going in the right direction. So I was like, okay, now that I know where I want my impact to be, I briefly took some time off to restudy and get up to speed. And then I was more like, hey, climate is so big. What do I want to do in climate? There are agriculture, energy, and then I have experience and I have a background in software development, product management. So I can be immediately effective more than if I was like, okay, let's relearn everything about energy. And, I don't have decades of experience. Let's leverage my experience where I have it, bring the climate lens. And around that time, I met with the founder of Green.io at a climate conference that was introduced to me by one of my friends. And I discovered Green Software. I met the director of the Green Software Foundation in London. And then I became very passionate about the topic. And I had a aha moment for me and say, hey, I was there in Silicon Valley when we went from waterfall to agile. And agile was everywhere. We had agile coaches and agile training. And for many years, everyone was, I remember interview like, oh, what are your agile practices? It was really a moment in Silicon Valley when I was in tech. And I was like, we need the same, but for green software. And right now we don't hear too much about it.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, I want to be a catalyst for that to happen. And so founded my consultancy practice to raise awareness about the issues and also solutions. And then, work with companies that build software to reduce their carbon impact, but also their water impact and really build green software.
Amazing.
And green software here is not like there is no impact. It's not neutral. And I don't think we can ever be neutral, but at least reducing the impact of software versus wasting so much energy, water, minerals, rare earth elements, and just like there is no tomorrow, everything, more forever.
How has that been for you? Because I feel like right now there's we're constantly in this mode of growth and consumption and like just continuous nonstop growth, especially with generative AI, right? That just makes everything happen so much faster, and the possibilities are endless. Do companies care at this moment about building green software and being thoughtful about that?
I would say not everyone. Some do. And I think my bet is that more and more will. Right now, it's still very niche, I feel. I mean, in the US, it depends where in the world. In Europe, it's very well advanced. And so it's so funny because I'm French and I'm American. I have both nationalities now. And I've been here for 22 years. And I can see here, it's, we're the mecca of tech, in Silicon Valley. But we don't know too much about climate. When I go to France, it's like France is the most advanced country in Europe, and Europe is one of the most advanced regions when it comes to climate in the world. And so over there, I have all the climate expertise, and people are really well trained in like, oh, we need to reduce our impact, and we need to have regulations on data centers and on this and on that. But they are not leading the tech revolution or AI revolution, what's catching up. So like, hey, that's good. I can maybe have the best of both worlds and make them connect. They should talk to each other.
Where's that barrier, right? Like, what is the U.S. heavy tech industry? Like, why aren't they thinking about building more sustainably? Why isn't climate top of mind?
So I would say there's been like on the big trend, like for over decades trend, the political climate has been very polarizing, and it didn't used to be. There many decades ago, Republicans, Democrats, they were all believing in the same science, and then it got political, and then you have political divide. So maybe companies are more cautious. The current administration is not helping as well. So there is a lot of greenwashing happening. But what I'm hearing in the space is that a lot of companies still want to do the right thing, and they know they're here for the long haul. So an administration can come and go. Climate change is not just going to evaporate because there is an administration around. So, and companies are more and more aware of the risk. There are real risks. If insurance collapses and like the industry of insurance, because there are too many fires and nobody can get an insurance anywhere, it's going to be a big problem for the economy and all those companies, right? Yeah. So I think there is some definite awareness that it's a problem at the highest level. For a little while, there was a bit of green washing. Now it's more greenwashing. There are still things happening, but I would say when they're happening, it's kind of hidden from the view. They're not going to claim it in the open because of the fear of repercussion.
When you say greenwashing versus greenhushing, can you define that a little bit?
Greenwashing was more like, hey, we're green, and have communication campaign about practices that were supposed to be green, or misleading information is really not green at all. We've had a little bit of this in Europe as well, but now there is regulations say if you do that, you have heavy penalties. So when you claim that you're carbon neutral, you better prove with data that's really neutral. Otherwise, don't claim it. Yeah. we don't have the same legislation here. But right now, anyways, it's not happening anymore because right now, officially, climate change doesn't exist, right? And the EPA has just removed its own ability to legislate or give guidance on carbon emissions.
So you have this viewpoint of, coming from France and being very familiar with the European legislation around this, and then working in the California government, and then seeing the shift in our own political leader. To what extent do you think change can actually happen without those government regulations that mandate?
I still have hope because of the physical forces of nature. And it's just like, I wish it was happening quicker, but for sure, what we see is going to be here to stay. We're going to see more droughts, more floods, more, fires, more everything. So, and the people are going to feel the pressure. People feel the pressure also with data centers. And I was actually really surprised in a good way. Say, hey, they do care. So there are things that people care about, actually, and they're able to organize. And when they understand that a new data center may, depending of where, the geography where the new data center is, may pump all your your water, and you're maybe gonna run out of drinkable water. People are like, oh no, or when it's polluting, then say, hey, my child has asthma because of this data center that's next door.
Yeah.
The concerns are not going to disappear because the reality is still there. Then I would say we have some advantages also in terms of economic forces. Clean, renewable energy right now is the cheaper and the quicker energy to install. So it's quicker to have a solar panel installed than building a coal factory.
Right. Or nuclear.
It's even longer.
Actually...
Nuclear takes 15 to 20 years to build, right? So, I think we need everything. The problem is that the administration at the federal level is not helping with, some of those. But states still have, in Texas, I think it's where there is the most solar panel or solar energy in the U.S. And they're Republicans, so there's economic...
Yeah.
The economics on the energy side are definitely helping. So there are big trends like this, I think, no matter what, exist. And then there are, if you're a major company, a global company, you need to abide by the regulations of all the countries you serve. So if you operate in Europe, you still need, I know and the federal administration right now is trying to put a lot of pressure on the EU so that American companies don't have to comply with the local regulation, threatening with tariffs and things like that. But, so far they still hold. And so if you operate in Europe, you need to respect the law of Europe, And so, and in China as well. So many countries have more and more regulation coming. And even in the state, we have regulation coming. So California was the first state to pass regulation with SB 253 and 261. New York just passed similar regulation where you need companies above a certain amount of revenue need to disclose their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so I think, you have different pressures that will make companies at some point say, hey, we really need to do something about this, because regulatory pressure, because of consumer or backlash of the community saying, hey, what? You're building all those data centers are polluting us, and you're not doing, when we look at your reports on carbon emissions, you're not actually doing any effort to reduce them. Year after year is like skyrocketing. And so a lot of public pressure, policy pressure eventually at the state level, and then economics. So I'm hoping that at some point, people will be very interested, and this topic that's currently niche in the US will become, just like I was mentioning before, the agile moment, like everyone, green software, everyone, let's all hands on deck. Let's do this.
Let's talk about some of the examples of these companies that are actually making a shift here. You talk about MasterCard as an example, 28 million in savings and 47% electricity cut. How did that happen? What did they actually do to change?
Yeah. So, and I will give you more example, but typically what they did is really leverage green ops.
What is green ops?
Is focusing more on performance and reliability. So, hey, let's make everything reliable and performance and cost effective, not just having technology for having technology and we don't care about the cost or, those metrics. Green ops include the carbon filter and then even more, like you can add water and other environmental impact, but you have these new metrics that is a first class metrics. It's a lens through which you look at your platform and then you take action to reduce the metrics you need to reduce, when they're bad indicators. So for example, to make it real, MasterCard was asking themselves questions like, what would be the carbon impact if we built this application in this region versus this other region? What if we built this application in Quebec, where it's a lot of electricity is hydro generated, like water, so it's super clean, or in France, which is nuclear, 70%, or versus like coal-based energy grid, where it's gonna emit more carbon, right? So where do you build this? Where do you train an AI model, because it's super energy intensive. So you want to train it on a very clean grid versus polluted, not unclean grid. Not only that, but like, and what if we build this application on this cloud provider? This is another cloud provider, and some people have shifted from AWS to Google Cloud or to Microsoft. And depending sometime on the effectiveness, but also just on a disclosure versus non-disclosure. So they are looking also at cloud provider. They were asking themselves the question, hey, is this data storage policy having an impact on carbon? And usually, yes. How long do you keep data? The longer you keep data or the more data you collect, that is not really necessary. What is the color of the eyes of your grandmother? You don't need to collect from your consumers, but all of that has a carbon impact, right? So what is your data policy? Should we have serverless versus monolithic architecture?
So is that where it starts? If people are listening and they work for a technology company, a software company, where's a good place to start thinking about this and how to even know what your baseline is, and then figure out where do you even go from there?
Exactly. That was what I was about to say. So first, train yourself in the sustainability language, and I'll be happy to provide resources for our listeners to.
That'll be great. I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, to train themselves into the sustainability language of software, and then the first thing is do a first audit to set your baseline, and then you're gonna have a few projects and do some experimentations that are low risk, but you see the outcome, and then you're going to do more of them. And then, eventually like, hey, you can educate internally and raise the awareness and accountability and say, hey, if we do that and that, shifting your load scheduling to regions that are cleaner, or at times that are cleaner, like we say, hey, let's schedule this batch at night. We'll run it in Texas. There's a lot of wind in Texas at night. Boom. Versus, at this time of the day, let's switch to California when the sun at noon is full bloom. And you can do.
Are there resources that tell you where? Okay.
And there's software, so you can do API calls. For example, I'm just going to say a company name, but there are many. But Electricity Maps is a company that's very discovered right now. A lot of people are using them, and they connect to their APIs to know not only the carbon intensity of the grid by region, but also the price of the electricity at that moment. So you can do some arbitrage on the geography, the time, the price of your electricity, and make better decisions. So yeah, definitely, it's a lot of optimization. But I would start with auditing, and then experimenting. Okay. And then if you read the resources, I will share, there are starters, kickstart, where should you start? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you have a really great playbook on your website that kind of goes through all the phases of development and all the opportunities you have. So we'll be sure to link that. And I love that you just have it free and accessible for anybody.
Yeah, many free resources. The Green Software Foundations, Cloud Sustainability Watch, Climate Project Leaders, we all have like free resources that are very comprehensive, that give a lot of great ideas where to start, very feasible. It's just more like start with awareness, because a lot of people are not even aware. And the good thing is that it's good software management. It's not just, let's do that for the planet. Yeah, of course, we have a moral responsibility, but usually it's also aligned with cost decrease. So, and better products.
Yeah.
So you don't have to ask permission. Hey, can we do it in a way that's going to be more performant and consume less energy, and we're going to decrease our energy bill? Is this okay to decrease our energy bill? No, do it. It's a good thing.
Everybody's going to be happy with that.
Exactly.
Right.
So
you do talk about moral ambition from the tech industry. Tell me more about that. What would that actually look like?
Yeah. So for me, I'm amazed at that the industry needs a little bit of pressure to make the right choice right now. Right now, we have a very extractive approach where it's more everything forever, to quote the title of a book, and that analyzes the psyche a little bit of Silicon Valley and our era, and especially with AI. And now it's more like bigger is better, and those AI companies are trying to force AI and generative AI on consumers, that it's embedded everywhere. You don't have a choice to opt in. It's like soon it will be everywhere, and they ask you to interact with GenAI all day long, which is really not sustainable. And so what I would say is that for those companies, first commit to transparency versus misinformation. And then transparency means also accuracy, not give data that's not accurate, or you want it to be standardized so you can allow for comparison. A lot of the critique we've heard inside my own industry, like green software, is like, Google is going to publish statistics in one metric format, and then OpenAI in another one. And it's very difficult to compare. So let's have standards. And then also don't change your methodology of reporting, last year we included this year we didn't include that. So then you cannot do the tenfold comparison as well. So be mindful of that. And then I would say, transparent, of course, and then do no harm kind of mindset. So of course there will be harm, but at least address the externalities. If you're messing up with the grid and the water, and at least, commit to pick up the bill of upgrading the infrastructure. Wherever you put your data center, or you choose a data center, make sure that you're going to make water positive, because you're going to do some infrastructure investment that the community can still have access to water. Ask yourself the long-term question. Say, hey, it's good to have this solution, but before choosing a site, what is the population growth like? What is the concentration of data centers already in that space? Who needs access to this resource? Do we have agriculture? And what are the secondary impacts? For example, I was reading an article a few weeks ago, but it was in Oregon. There was a lot of nitrates. I'm not sure if it's nitrate in French, but nitrates in the water, like from agriculture. So it's not from the data center, but the data center, most of data center to power generative AI are water cooling technology, because the chips for generative AI, not traditional AI, are getting so hot so quick. You cannot just use air cooling. You need water cooling or liquid cooling. I think it's more efficient to cool down. And so most of the data centers right now with water cooling are actually evaporative systems. So you take the water out of the natural cycle. And so there is less water in the aquifer. And so the nitrate concentration that was more diluted before become at a higher concentration because there is less water. And so maybe a concentration of nitrate that was not too bad in the past from just agriculture, now it's aggravated. And the article was thinking it was leading to miscarriages, for example. So I would say as a technology, do your due diligence. And so don't be misleading and be a good citizen, right?
Yeah.
So engage the community, work real solutions versus like, hey, we don't care about externalities. Let's just do our big splash and get rich. And then who cares about people who are going to pay the bill, in terms of their health, of electricity cost, of, all of that, I would say. Yeah.
I feel like we could spend a lot more time talking about this because I'm so curious what's going to make the first leaders step up to actually be the trendsetters here, because I think the competition is just so fierce that nobody's putting their moral ambition as a first step in their decision to lead.
So that's why I think we need to put pressure as employees, as voters,
consumers,
community organizers. As mentioned, I was really surprised to see how many showed up at municipal councils to say, no, we don't want your data center, staying until 2 or 3 a.m. with questions and say, hey,
things matter.
Things matter.
That's what gets people, absolutely, especially when you can show up in person like that.
Definitely.
Nolwenn, I have a fill in the blank for you. People think environmental cost of AI is about carbon, but you'd say the more urgent conversation is about.
Yeah, I would say people think that environmental cost of AI is about carbon, but I'd say the more urgent conversation is actually about resource limits, energy, water, materials, rare earth minerals. We're operating in a world where there is no limit. Tech it doesn't want any limit, but the world has limit, nature has limits, climate has limits. So I would say, the more urgent conversation is about resource limits.
Yeah, resource limits. Like, what are the parameters we're living within? Because we have one planet, we have one Earth to extract from, and we're extracting. I was listening to a podcast a Green IO podcast you recommended that was saying that we are extracting the equivalent of
Mount Everest.
one Mount Everest every year.
Yes,
like that's every year, just
and
like
minerals.
taking it out of the Earth. Not to mention the problems that causes with releasing everything that's been stored away for so long in these
methane, carbon. Yeah. So being good stewards of our planet.
If people want to get a hold of you or follow your work, where can they find you?
So on LinkedIn, Nolwenn Godard, Carbon2C, my company. So it's carbon2c.com. And I will definitely share with you some resources they can dig in. There are great resources with the Green Software Foundation, Green IO, Climate Product Leaders, Cloud Sustainability Watch. AI Watch is a tool where you can see on your inference when you're chatting with GPT and Claude, in real time, you see, here's my carbon impact. I consume 1 liter of water just like having this conversation for the past 5 minutes. So there are tools definitely to help you. Yeah.
Great. We'll link all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Louisa, for having me, and conversation to be continued.
Sounds great.
That was part 1 of my conversation with Nolwenn Godard. And what I love about her story is that she didn't just wake up one day and suddenly be a climate person. She pitched an idea at PayPal that didn't go anywhere. She introduced language into the executive order that almost got cut. She kept bringing climate back into the conversation until it became the conversation. Where could you be bringing climate into your conversations? Are you getting stuck? Are you unsure of where to start? Please feel free to reach out to me. I am down to workshop this with anybody. I want to see change happen. And so if you want to reach me, you can reach me at anyjobcanbeaclimatejob@gmail.com. And I'll also include all of the amazing resources that Nolwenn mentioned in the show notes below. She's sending over a huge tech list cheat sheet that I will include. We have her playbooks and the case studies at carbon2c.com, her consultancy website. I'll include Green IO, the Green Software Foundation, electricity maps, and everything else. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do give it a like or subscribe. And really what's more meaningful than anything are the comments. I would love to hear what resonated. Did you take action? Do you have questions? Are you confused? This helps me build a better show for you. And it really means a lot if you could just take a couple seconds to jot down some thoughts. My name is Louisa Henry, and this is Any Job Can Be a Climate Job. Thanks for listening.